the international issue has to do with actually the brain drain, and which, remember that when all the revolutions happened in Africa in the 70s, all the doctors left. So that now in much of Africa, there's only, back to the mental health stuff, there's large parts of Africa where there's only one psychiatrist for 100,000 people. So it's a concern then, for example, that places like Australia and New Zealand and a lot of other countries in the world have docs who come in from other countries where by coming there, they're potentially decimating the workforce back in their community. And so in the US, of course, I think a lot of people don't realize, and it's because of how the data is managed, that about 40% of the doctors in our country are trained overseas. And it's a huge number. And the reason is once they enter the US, and they have to go through more training, they can't just automatically walk in here, but they have to go through more training. And then they get a number as though they were trained in the US, so they disappear in the data sets. So you have to figure out how you're asking the question. And there are certain visa statuses that they have to work in rural areas and so forth. But there's some dysfunctional things about that too. So for example, in Australia, if you go in the outback communities, there's a lot of people that are from India or Pakistan or whatever. But to put them in a community of Aussies, and then they have their own dietary, needs and so forth, it's very hard for them to get the food they need. They don't have any culture, they're very lonely. It's not doing anybody necessarily a big favor. And in some ways it would make more sense to have PAs that were Australians that were trained there, and that will probably happen eventually. So how do you not create structures that lead to brain drain? But then people say, well, we think PAs should be able to move around. And I think what I would see happening, the NCCPA at one point, the reason I got into this position, I was the chair-elect of the NCCPA, and there were all these rumors that were being created by the AAPA, which was ridiculous, that the NCCPA is going to create an international exam and allow PAs to move all over the world. Well, first of all, you couldn't do it if you wanted to, because the diseases are different. I mean, you couldn't take US and apply it to Japan or South Africa. I mean, it's a ridiculous idea, even if you wanted to. But what you can do, I think, to increase the legitimacy of the profession is to perhaps do regional things. So you could have a regional exam that was for sub-Saharan Africa. You could have one that was for Australia and New Zealand. You could have one that was for the European community, assuming it still exists as a community, whatever. And then eventually there will be some sort of licensing, and there will be some sort of certification. And about that time is when it might make more sense to think about, can people move around? But yet it shouldn't just happen automatically, and it's not going to happen